Oh, okay. Welcome. It's so good to welcome you, my brother. I missed it. It was around the corner. Anyway, it's so good to see you, Julio. And in the audience, welcome very, very much. One of Manhattan Neighborhoods Network's own, as it were, but also a great citizen of the world and an intellectual of very high order, that being Julio Nunez. And he is the director of the, let me get it straight,
The Immigrant Lives Oral History Project.
That's right. Immigrant Lives Oral History Project, which is a very important kind of organization. We're going to be talking about that organization because there are things going, and he's a Dominican by birth. And he's also written a book that we've got displayed here, and it's called Utopia Dominicana. And it's a book that we're going to be discussing and other matters. He's also somebody who is intellectually very, very curious about the human condition in a very interesting way. Julio, so good to see you. Glad we could put this together.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here again, and I look forward to this conversation. I call it my great conversation with Mr. Connor.
Okay, we're looking forward to that. Now, let's go over it again. We did it in the last, it's been busy and everything. Your own background, just quickly, you know, born and raised, that kind of thing. And I know you want to talk about intellect or intelligence.
Yes. The importance of conversation within the context of the larger meaning of civilization, and also the moral duty or responsibility of our use of intelligence, especially as citizens. But in any case, I was born in the Dominican Republic, and I came to the U.S. when I was 12 years old. I went to school in the public schools of New York City, major in philosophy at Colgate University, and then went to the University of Granada in Spain to study existentialism, especially as it developed in Spain with Miguel de Unamuno, Jose Ortega.
Unamuno, yes, right.
Great thinker, very profound. And then I did graduate studies in the philosophy of law and American pragmatism.
Oh, really? Okay.
And subsequent to that, I became an editor and publisher because I saw that there was a need to make the community aware of its rights and to contribute as much as I could with the skills that I had picked up in my academic studies. And currently, I am, as you said, the executive director of the Immigrant Lives Oral History Project, which I see as an extension of that preparation because it focuses on the meaning of what it means to be an immigrant and what we immigrants contribute to this great society. And I do that by interviewing people. These are oral histories in which I give people an opportunity to tell us their stories. And it's amazing to see how mathematicians, astronomers, historians, playwrights, painters, composers have come to this country and contribute enormously. And I think counter the stereotype of immigrants as being people who come here to get welfare, to get Medicaid and all these things, or to, one of the worst stereotypes, become drug dealers and whatnot. And so it's important to me that young people especially see these oral histories that I am putting together.
That's marvelous, absolutely marvelous you're doing that, because we are a nation. The United States, you're talking about, a nation of immigrants, and there's been stereotyping of each group as they came by the people who were already here. I guess it happens, and immigration is also something that has a tableau for the world. There are people moving not only to the United States, or it only relates to the United States, but also around the world. There's a great deal of movement going on. So it's a larger issue as well, I presume, although, you know, anyway, that's
true. The points that I'm trying to make regarding what immigrants contribute to this society, I think could also be made within any other society in the world. As you know, in Europe, right now, as we speak, in France, they are expelling the gypsies and other immigrants.
Are they really?
Yes,
really?
They are literally taking these people to the airport and saying, we don't want you here.
Okay, wait a minute. I know there's a lot of stuff, people coming up from Africa, coming in from Libya and that kind of thing. There's that is a problem. But the gypsies?
The gypsies
the Romans,
who come from Romania and other places in Europe. And the argument there is that these are unwanted people simply because either they're dependent on the society, that is, they get all the benefits that the French work for, but they don't supposedly work for, and also that they are criminals in many instances. So here you have, ironically, one of the most civilized countries in the world using these, what I would call, obsolete arguments to throw people out. But that's what happens when you have crises. And obviously France is going through some difficult times, just as other European countries.
They got a general strike going as we talk, because they're going to raise the retirement age to 62 from 60.
And the Spaniards are also preparing to go on strike as well because of the labor laws that have been changed. That's right. So all of these are pressures that then elicit the worst in humans. And one of the first things that people tend to do is, of course, look for the immigrants to blame for the problems.
We're doing it here also with people coming up from Mexico.
Yes.
And we got, what, I don't know how many million people undocumented and that kind of thing. And that's people of a Spanish-speaking stamp and that sort of thing, so you'd be sensitive to that. I don't know, it's happened Puerto Rican. And people seem to have an ability to scapegoat another group or something like that when they move in. I'm wondering if there's some reverse to that in a way. Like we had indigenous people in, let's say, the Americas, and then there came immigrants in the form of Pizarro, Cortez, and company, and so forth. And that was a thing where those indigenous people might very well have been concerned about the effects of these immigrants that were coming in, if you understand what I mean, because we wiped out a genocide of people, as you're well aware of.
Yeah, those were special types of immigrants. Obviously, they were here to conquer.
Right. There's been a lot of that.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that. Recently, I had a conversation with a priest, a Roman Catholic priest, who said that one of the Lord's insistences, or the things that the Lord Jesus Christ had given us in Christianity, was the mandate to conquer. To conquer in a broad sense, I guess, in the sense that man comes into the world and he has to take possession and become master of the universe. But the idea of the Spaniards having this in mind, this Catholic outlook when they came to the Americas, I think is very much an explanation as to wiping out these terrific civilizations, you know, the Aztecs, the Incas, and other peoples of this
and the
continent.
The Carib people of the Caribbean.
The Caribs, the Tainos, and all of these. And the idea that these immigrants did this, to use your word, immigrant, in that sense, is shocking. Shocking, but yet these are very, very cultured people who say these things.
I think Genghis Khan came down into Mesopotamia, and the Tigris and Euphrates ran with blood from their massacring huge numbers of people. That would be the fear of the foreign on the part of people. I don't know if it's part of the inherited thinking of the fear of the other.
Yeah,
it's something that people maybe have been worried about even from Paleolithic times.
It's the root. It's something profound in our nature that requires that we sort of gang up on that which those whom we do not know or understand. But I just wanted to go back to your mentioning of the fact that there have been incidents of violence against Mexicans, especially in Staten Island recently.
Arizona now.
And where Arizona is actually state violence of the rights of these immigrants.
Right.
But what it reminded me of was the great Mexican poet, Octavio Paz, Nobel Prize winner in literature, who said, it is a sign of North Americans, meaning U.S. citizens, ignorance, that they don't realize that the great contributions that Mexicans certainly in particular can make is that they bring great heart in the way they live. They bring intuition into daily activities, and that this sensibility is a great contribution that the Mexicans bring to this country, a country that has developed technologically, certainly to a very large extent, and a country that through its economic system has been so prosperous, but in many ways has lost that beauty of heart and that sensibility, that artistic outlook on life that he says the Mexicans have as part of their nature and that they bring with them. So to reject them is to, in effect, hurt ourselves.
All right, I can see that very clearly. Also true that a lot of the people, the Dene and so the Aboriginal cultures were very much in tune with what we would call ecology, or the nature. They lived within nature. They had a feeling and appreciation of nature that we're coming to understand is something that would be important for us to understand as well. So again, it's a blending of things. New York City is an interesting place to live. I understand we've now got 195 countries at the UN, and this idea of sovereignty or of individual groups. We call them nations. We call people. How do we define a people? It's by language, religious, culture, that kind of thing. And the differences reside within that. And we got sizable communities, last count of 189 of them in the New York City area. So in a sense, everybody's here.
This is the cosmos. This is
really,
the cosmos
I think more than anywhere else. 189 of the 195 nations recognized by the United Nations have sizable communities within the New York City metropolitan area. So I think that's probably uniquely metropolitan and comprehensive in terms of the people that have come to the United States more so than, let's say, the countries of Europe.
Well, you know, just before coming on the air, you and I were talking about the controversy regarding the proposed mosque near Ground Zero.
Right.
And what you just said, in light of that, reminds me of El-Andalus, which was the great center of civilization and culture in southern Spain, when the Arabs, and well, as you said, the Muslims, the Islamic world, was in Europe, in this Iberian Peninsula, and how they were able to coexist. The Muslims, the Jews, the Christians, and this was a thriving civilization with all these mixtures. And then you have New York City, that, as you said, has so many nationalities, so many cultures, and it is precisely here where this controversy is taking place.
That's
it's sort of ironic, right?
Well, yeah, it has to do because these nation states also are the ways in which the political affairs of the world go. And we have a world that is, for good or ill, or out of the historical development, one that has differentiation in terms of material prosperity or, income or prosperity. They have the haves and the have-nots, and that's a big division within the world. And so the haves that have really want to make sure that the have-nots are not going to come and take away what they have, if you understand.
Yes.
That's something that's been part of the human experience. So they're very worried about people coming in even at the level of just they're going to take my job or they're going to take whatever they're going to take from the public trough or something. So it's all that's at an economic level. And you got these differences between the people of the world in terms of material abundance or a material standard of living, which is something that differentiates the people of the world. It's not well enough taken into account by a lot of people, it seems to me.
Yeah, and I think that our leaders, our political leaders, instead of analyzing and going deep into that fact that you just described, they actually use that to their own to grind their own agenda. And of course, since the people are not engaged at a deep level and in a clear sense understand what's happening.
Using their intelligence.
Exactly. I'm getting towards that moment. Since the people are not using their intelligence in order to discern and decide, they may end up being hoodwinked and forced to make decisions by these politicians that may not be for the common good.
Right.
And to the ultimate good.
Wow.
And that,
Okay.
that brings a topic that I wanted to speak with you about, since you are so experienced with this, with conversation. I think that, for me, the great conversation of humanity, which goes way back to the ancient Greeks, not only to Plato and his dialogues, but that has gone through thousands of years, and even now, we're engaged in a great conversation.
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, we do not know what entails the art of conversation. We do not listen. We do not engage. We do not have meeting of minds because we do not make our thoughts and ideas clear, or the other side does not make an effort to understand what we are talking about. And therefore, there is a break in communication, and therefore there is no great conversation or contribution that we make to the great conversation. Instead, what we have is hollering, screaming, and you have all that junk that's going on radio, especially on the right.
Yeah, radio is particularly suited to what Marshall McLuhan would call a hot medium.
Yes.
It extends one of our sensory capabilities in high definition. But, I mean, I'd be happy to talk about that, because this series that I have is called Conversations, and I always called it Conversations from the very beginning. And I really don't know for sure, but I think of a conversation as connoting spontaneousness.
It's like an essay.
Well, you're relating to, you're relating. It's spontaneity. It connotes spontaneity, like you run into something, and it is not structured to a purpose. It is not structured in a way that an interview is. An interview, you could have question A, B, C, D, E. You're going to go through and you're going to follow and stick to it. It's linear. And a conversation is more multi-sensorial or multi-involvement, like fellas in a jam session or something.
Well, I actually
it's
picture,
different
it's
than
like
structured.
A dance. It's like a dance.
Well, okay,
you move this way, you just did, and I move with you. Even though, as you said, there is spontaneity, there is the rhythm of improvisation like jazz, there's also, we must stick to the topic. I cannot jump all of a sudden when you mention something like what you just did, contrasting an interview with a conversation, and all of a sudden I'm talking about, the eternal recurrence. Well, I'm reading a book called The Eternal Recurrence. What does that have to do with what you just said? It must be on topic.
Well, okay,
that's
now,
what conversation entails.
With all due respect, I think a conversation would be more likely to have something come up from outside the structure than would an interview. An interview, we're going to talk about the book, and we're going to talk about the book, and we're going to stay on subject, and we're going to have to, like that. I think an interview is more structured.
Right.
A conversation is more often to spontaneous interjections of things that come up in a spontaneous way, like freeform jazz as opposed to a Mozart symphony or something where it's all it's structured. And you have the structure ahead of time. I think it's different, and it speaks spontaneity. And it's just some people are very given with. We had a talk with Vincent Morgan, and we were talking about how interested it is. A lot of people feel they want structure in their lives. A lot of people, particularly it seems disadvantaged people, they want the children to understand that they have to do what they want structure. They want structure, whereas the people that are more comfortable tend to think, well, just let people be and do whatever they want. A Spock view of the world.
Yeah.
Just let it happen, it'll come out. Because usually it's people that are more comfortable, it seems to me, but the people that are uncomfortable or maybe oppressed in a way or something, they want to have structure. So, and it's structured. It's encouraging practicality.
Yeah. I think, though, that what you have just alluded to points to the fact that those who have made it, those who have arrived, those who have the basic needs covered,
who are the have?
They don't need so much structure because they're already there. Whereas those who come in, if I'm an immigrant who does not speak English, I want my kid to go to school, pay attention, learn the language, play by the rules. Why? Because I know that education is a token that will take them up in the social ladder. So I would insist on that.
Up in the social and economic
ladder. Yeah. Very important, economic ladder. But going back to the subject of conversation, I also think that one of the requirements of a true conversation is respect. I must respect you as someone who can contribute to my being, to my becoming better as a person. And you must respect me in the sense that you weigh what I say and you entertain it and you may respond in any which way that you think is appropriate. But there is that sense in which when there is conversation, there is respect. You know, when we talk, remember Samuel Huntington, I believe, was who came up with this theory that Harvard professor who died a few years ago said that in this day and age, in the 21st century, the big world problems are not going to come about as clashes between countries. It's going to be clashes of civilizations.
Yeah, right.
And that there is a higher level of conversation.
Right.
We must be able to engage as civilizations and respect each other, but we must do so in a civilized way. If we claim to be civilizations, we must act in a civilized way. And I think that, for instance, with this humongous problem in the world today, with the Islamic world and the Western world, I think we must learn to engage in conversation as Westerners with the Islamic world, and the Islamic world must make an effort. And you know, I think I also mentioned before we came on air, that to me, the debate, all this that's being discussed publicly about the controversy with the proposed mosque, some people have not considered deeper issues, and that issue is related to this idea of conversation between civilizations. I said, wait a minute. For instance, how come we, the citizens of New York, have to accommodate, and I'm saying this with all due respect, to, you know, in considering the rights, the right to express yourself religiously and all that business, which is everybody knows. But why should we be the ones that accommodate a civilization, a religion, or a group, a minute group within a certain religion, that thinks that violence is okay? They can blast the World Trade Center, kill thousands of people, but we have to open our doors and say, go ahead, do as you please with your plans to build whatever. Let's put him on the spot and say, wait a minute, do you realize that we are sensitive to the fact that our people, our citizens were massacred? Have you considered the fact that we are sensitive about what you propose? And engage in conversation, but do so with respect and address the other, address the Islamic world and those who are the leaders of this idea of building this mosque. Call them to task. Say, okay, we have a tradition of allowing diversity of religious outlook and whatnot. But you too must consider the fact that we have also feelings and we have respect for our citizens. And I think at that level, it would be a fruitful thing to do. But I haven't seen that done publicly.
Well, that's called dialogue. If you have dialogue, you've got to have mutual respect. If you got dialogue, it's I and thou, Mr. Buber talked about, rather I and it. You know, that kind of thing, and that's the thing between them. And I think that probably, I don't know, your question of that is, what we've had a historical development, and we've had a thing where you've had differentiation not only of living standard, the haves and have-not, you've also had a differentiation in terms of wealth and power.
Access.
And influence. No, power and influence. So some people are powerful, or ideas even, or civilizations are powerful, and it migrates in a certain sense, and they have, and then they think that their system in place, let's say, is what is called historically legitimate, that they are legitimate. I presume the emperors of Rome thought that their empire was legitimate historically, and they lived in castles, and the serfs were in the mud, and so on. Periclean Greece was based on slavery. You had to have slavery for some to live the life of the mind and spirit. Then we had 1,000 years after Rome of the feudal order, or dynastic states, and the historical legitimacy of the leadership of the society, which has always been a few people who had the power, lived in the castle on the hill, while the mass of the people have been more or less their serfs on a feudal estate. The duke loses, or the earl or the king loses a feudal estate in a crap game with another duke or earl or king, and there's so many acres of land, so many horses, so many cows, so many chickens, and so many serfs go along with it. It was not just. There was no justice. Then we had, now we have a system where you have inordinate power, and people who have that power tend to think that their view and the principles that underlie their culture, whether it's a nation state or related in international order and everything like that, are historically what would be called legitimate. And then anybody who doesn't agree with the basic premises of that are illegitimate in a certain sense and are called terrorists, or they're called things by the people who are asserting the legitimate right they have to run the world, as it were, or to have ownership of the institutions or responsibility for informing the institutions by which human beings interrelate and so forth. And so I think there'd be a number of people who might object to the United States. You're saying the United States takes this thing that people were killed in the world, 9/11 and everything. But I did a program last week with Roland Danko who was talking about Kurt Waldheim was a war criminal because he was a Nazi and did things in Yugoslavia that were war criminals. And I said to him, I was aware of the fact that Eisenhower, as a military leader, Truman, and so forth, and there was a guy, Sullivan, somebody, they had a thing on the History Channel, great stuff on television now, it's coming more and more, who was in favor of, when we had complete, utter air superiority, nobody could do anything about the unceasing bombing of Germany toward the end of 44, 45, and they ordered...
Dresden, blasted and
thank
burnt.
you. They ordered, and knew what they were doing, they ordered... he's calling Hitler, or... because the winners write the history. Okay, that's what we get down through history. But they ordered incendiary bombing, firebombing, knowing that it was going to kill hundreds of thousands of civilians, women and children who were there. They knew that was going on, so that Mr. Eisenhower, and not to remember the name of the fellow who was pushing strategic bombing, Sullivan or somebody, was a war criminal on the side of the ones who win, but we don't hear about that. And then also the Vietnamese children who had napalm dropped on them by us in order to find our geostrategic view, are asserting our legitimacy in terms of the way to set up the world is being asserted by us. And I think there are probably some people who would say that's a small trade-off. There were, 4 million perhaps in the Southeast Asian incursion, a lot of conflict, but it was us that was doing it. We were intervening. We made a mistake, Mr. McNamara said. But the point being is the people who are legitimate, if they do something, even if it's killing hundreds of thousands, that's okay because they're the winners and they're the kings in the castle.
Right.
But if somebody else does anything, Robin Hood, or anybody who's going to question the authority by actually attacking them, like they attacked our castle keep on the Hudson here, then that can't be allowed because they are terrorists outside of God's will or the way in which the universe has given legitimacy to a certain order.
So you're saying that those in power label those that they consider terrorists or the bad guy, simply because they are in power and they have the ability.
They claim historical legitimacy, and it used to be the communists. Remember, it was the communists with the Kennan and everything. Now it's the Muslims, And that's being done by a lot of people. You have a very powerful lobby, the AIPAC, a very powerful controversy between Israel and Palestinians. You have a thing in Kashmir. You have the 1/4 of the world population being Muslim, and they are the scapegoat du jour of the so-called established order of legitimacy.
I understand
and that's
your
the
point.
kind of thing. I just bring that point
I
up in terms
understand
of
your point,
geopolitics.
but I also think that it is human nature. I would submit, and I know that that term can be objected to.
It's a biggie.
It is a biggie, but I think that the point you're making about those in power and those who claim legitimacy, you're looking at it and saying the Western world generally, especially in the last few centuries.
I'm thinking the haves and have-nots.
The haves.
Yeah.
But it could also be the other side. You could say that the other side is doing something similar. We're being labeled as the bad guy because they have something, not perhaps economically or as military powers, but they have something. They have certainty, religious certainty, and therefore they use that to label us as infidels and whatnot. And what I'm saying, this is human. There's always a tendency to label the other the bad guy.
Well, don't forget, you've also been submitted to public relations manipulation of consciousness, and like there was a scapegoating of the Jewish people by the elders, the protocols of the elders of Zion, to take one little part, or they'll take one part of a culture, and then they will say that's characteristic of everything, and then there came up this thing, anti-Semitism madness with the Nazis. Yeah. I can't ever understand that, what's not to like, because the Jewish people are so principled and so forth. But you have that, and so you get that thing coming up, and so it is with, you got 1/4 of the world population, cultural differences, so it'd be like saying the Ku Klux Klan represents the United States of America.
Or the guy who's going to burn the Quran in
Florida, the guy who's going to burn,
represents America.
No, but the side of the people who, let's say, have an interest in Israel, or in the Iraq, or in Afghanistan, or are seizing the oil, or whatever. They see us as imperial. They see the countries of the world as running dog to our model, International Monetary Fund, the economic order, all that sort of thing, that we are legitimate. The ones who are aligned with us are legitimate. China is just the knockoff of the American model, and all that. They see that. And then you have 1/4 of the world population, which is very varied from Indonesia to Mauritania, and there are a lot of differences in there.
True.
And that's always the case with that. And so what they're going to do, the PR firms and the public relations
lump them all together.
A particular political objective of a particular political group will do, it's called scapegoating, and the Islamic faith is being scapegoated now by bringing up particular aspects of it that some cultural people might feel, but it's not characteristic of the whole. It'd be like blaming the United States as being representative of the Ku Klux Klan, hanging people.
You know, going back when you mentioned the firebombing of Dresden,
horrible,
for instance.
Horrible, and there were civilians, and they knew it.
You know, it reminded me, and this is not well known, that's why I'm going to mention it. There was a British philosopher called Elizabeth Anscombe.
I think I've seen
who wrote
a
very famous essay titled Intentionality.
Okay.
And in the 1950s, former President Truman, Harry Truman, was going to receive a doctorate at Cambridge University where she was teaching. And she objected and went out and protested, saying that Harry Truman was a criminal. Why? Because he knew that by bombing Nagasaki and Hiroshima, millions and millions of innocent people were going to be killed.
With all due
and he went ahead and did it.
With all due respect, there were more killed in 10 days before Hiroshima by firebombing, incendiary bombing of civilian areas. They knew that. It was terrorism. Now, if you're powerful and you're doing that, nobody calls you a terrorist. Nobody says you're a war criminal because you write the history. And if you conquer, if you win, then you can do whatever you want. You're far above the law of anybody saying anything to do with justice. But I'm saying that's the kind of world we live in.
I point that out as another example of what you're saying, namely that it was something that required a lot of courage on this woman's part to actually say, wait a minute, just because we won the war and we are the superpowers now, we cannot deny the fact that we did this horrendous thing. And this man cannot be rewarded by giving him a doctorate.
I can see
and what
that.
you're saying is these guys who made those decisions to bomb innocent civilians in Dresden and other...
and then in Vietnam after.
In Vietnam with napalm
and in Iraq.
whatnot.
There's been $3 trillion and all that going on in Iraq and what's going on in Afghanistan. And the question is on the mossing or the scapegoating and that, using of intelligence and so forth, is the enemy du jour now is Muslim. And the thing is that more involved is economics. It's economics. You and I both have been involved with the thinking of Mortimer Adler and Lewis Kelso. We have an economic model, and all politics is informed by economics.
Right.
And it's all really about economics. That's what it's about. Haves and have-nots, forming capital and that sort of thing. And the basis of our legitimacy, it will always be covered, presented different, but the basis of legitimacy is that we have an economic model for the way the world should be organized, okay? And that model, right from and it goes back to our founding doctrine, Declaration of Independence, Constitution, James Locke, the Enlightenment, all that kind of thing that came out of the Enlightenment. And we got that in place 250 years or nearly so and so forth. And that we claim that model that we have is legitimate historically. We questioned socialism, we questioned communism, it didn't work. But what we have at a level of intellectualism is we do not have a system adequate to what the future requires henceforth. The system that we're claiming is legitimate, the West, is not legitimate historically in terms of what's required. And it may very well be like the feudal heads in Europe thought that the bumpkins across the Atlantic Ocean were hopelessly out of touch with anything called real legitimacy because they didn't have any of the assize courts or any of that kind of thing. Their institutions were out of touch. The biggest threat to the world is the United States of America, by far, because they're enthralled to their own model. They think they have a model for the world at this level, and they don't have. And it may be coming, particularly out of Indonesia. There are branches of economic scholarship within the Islamic world where they still have clung to, which we've gotten around all the wisdom schools, the proscription against interest or usury. We've gotten around it in the West. Jesus said it, Moses, everybody said it.
But we still go ahead and...
We have built our whole economy on it. We've gotten around that, but there are elements of what they call it Sharia, and one of the most important things they should understand, Sharia would have a system of economics where capital formation and distribution of ownership could be such that they would not have to resort to interest, or it would fundamentally question at an intellectual level, the same way the United States of America fundamentally questioned the assize courts and the legitimacy of the feudal order and so forth. They would question us, and we should be listening to that scholarship rather than the people who are reflecting the general angst of a fact that the world is being run by people that don't have a model adequate to what the future requirements are for the whole world, and the world is melting down now.
Do you think that
we could learn from them rather than scapegoat
our
them?
Intellectuals and our academics have failed because they have not addressed that issue in a powerful way to bring about some turn in the outlook that you just described?
Yes, absolutely. I think we're at a time of qualitative transformation beyond any other in the evolution of consciousness. We're at a point now where the weapons systems, extension of consciousness, are species lethal. They're in the hands of the United States of America that does not have a model adequate to what the future requires. They're caught up with all their institutions are outdated. They don't have a system that that the future requires because there have been qualitative transformations just as sure as the steam engine was bringing the Industrial Revolution. There have been qualitative transformations that requires the liberation rather than the reifying of enslaving institutions that has been characteristic and are characteristics of the whole wide world now.
So are we in danger as a civilization in this day and age in which there's global warming, there is the proliferation of nuclear weapons that are coming up in places like Iran and places like that? Are we now at risk because we failed to realize what you just pointed out?
Well, in my estimation, for whatever it's worth, I don't know the conversation. I think the real danger to the world is the United States of America, at a certain existential level, because it's the United States of America that has the weapon systems that all far rank everything else, and those weapon systems from modeling are what at a level of species, not at the level of one tribe over another, one country or something.
The human species.
The whole human species. Think evolution. We have the weapon systems that if they would have to be unleashed in order, according to the modeling, that would abolish the entire Homo sapiens species. That's capable. We haven't had that capability since about 1970. So that is something that we have. So we have to worry about what would unleash the United States, their weapon systems, in some sort of spasm of Barbara Tuchman, nothing to do with rationality, irrationality. It would be something like Israel throwing 10 bombs out or something, and angst and so forth or something. But that's the main threat.
But it's interesting. What you just said reminds me of going back to that original point about the use of intelligence or the responsibility to use our intelligence. If it is true, what you just said, that the United States is actually the greatest risk for humanity,
oh, I would say
then
so, yeah.
It is our responsibility as citizens of the United States to become aware and to question and to find out exactly what it is that we can do, if it is at all possible, to avoid that catastrophe.
Right, or it would
Otherwise,
be worth...
then we're just going to go in and...
No, but first of all, it could be established. Is it the case? It can only be modeled.
That's the question.
You can't run them all off and then say maybe a couple of people survive in New Guinea to test it like a petri dish. It got to be only modeling, and that's being done. And that is the case, apparently. And it's a lot of binary biological things, that they could wipe out the species. That's a tremendous capability. That's the extension of consciousness that is unique to us. We also have the ability on the living side that there's been a transformation in terms of our ability to affect the environment, create an environment other than in an Eden-like sense is given, that most of the creatures engage the environment with. We can make the environment different, technology. And on the living side, we have, and it's very hard for anybody to understand or anything in my view, we have, according to modeling, we got some people, Fuller, Burry Bookchin, others, we have at the level of capability, not the reality, don't get it confused with the reality of everyday reality, but at an ontologic level, one step removed from the everyday, but not yet into the spiritual myths and things that have been created to deal with what the bigger issues of a self-reflective consciousness asked of the universe. But that we now have transcended at the level of capability, this technological extension, we have transcended within the human context the ironclad laws of scarcity. There are more haves and have-nots at the level of capability for the first time in 200,000 years of evolution, and we crossed that line, that 50% line, about the same year, according to the modeling, that the weapons became species lethal in 1970, about 40 years ago from now. We crossed that line. And so that means that all of our institutions were formulated in a condition of zero sum, for one to of scarcity. Scarcity was the reality in which it was all evolved, all our institutions.
So we're living an illusion.
No, we're not living in an illusion. We're living in a world that has been qualitatively transformed at the level of capability.
And we don't realize it.
And we have not been able to realize it. And we haven't been able to, and our institutions that have all formulated within a condition of scarcity
outdated.
Are out, virtually all, including, most importantly, economic theory, and how are we going to form the capital to allow the technology to bring food to the lady in Africa that doesn't have to let her baby starve anymore because there's not, because we don't have a system, and allow us fully to realize that, and also to create in the mass of the population demand or money or capability to buy what's able to be produced without having it all tied up in a labor theory of value, which informs all economic and political theory.
Proposed a way out. But as you said, and it's unfortunate that very few people are even aware that these models and these thinkers came up with these things.
Yeah, well, you asked me the question.
Yeah.
That's why the United States thinks that its model is in place. They're now, and Lord Keynes said, you're going to be confronted, a letter to his grandchildren in their maturity about now, you're going to be confronted with something that's very hard to understand, massive, technologically induced, massive unemployment. And the only way we have to get money to the poor serfs on the estate, where all the assets are owned by a tiny class, just as the kings of feudal Europe owned all the land and everything. They own all the assets. It's all owned by a tiny class of people in every political entity in the international order. And there's no way for the people except to get some, like a serf, on an estate that's owned by the bankers or the Illuminati or whatever you want to call it. They have to do a thing, and they're going to be undercut because you're going to have technology that's not going to need them to do assembly line things like they did in the past. We're all caught up in this labor theory of value. We get the work ethic. We can bring out all kinds of things to get at the, work hard in school.
To justify or rationalize it.
To justify outdated institutions. So we're outdated as feudal Europe was in terms of the intellectuals are falling down on the job of providing some sort of alternative that the future requires if we're not going to join entropy and wipe out our species. Because if we're heading for the thing that would be with climate, the ultimate thing at a species level, it would create political difficulties. It would unleash the weapons. But it's the unleashing of the weapons that exist, and they're still there, and they're only growing, and all the research goes to give advantage to one tribe so they can steal from the other, that they have in realpolitik. So we've got an outdated system that we say is legitimate. Economic theory does not serve, and they haven't come up with an alternative way to form capital and distribute demand capability to the people, which they need.
You're giving me the impression that we're doomed.
No, I'm not. I'm saying there's an alternative, but the problem is that we should see the problem because it's not normal. It's not like your normal thing where you have a generation after generation, Franklin Roosevelt and all this. It's not. It almost has to be seen like at the level of speciation. We're coming into a new relationship to the cosmos if we make it. We did a thing with Isaac Asimov last year. He said, this is the defining generation of, after 10,000 generations, this is the defining generation.
Whether we survive and move on to the greater cosmos or we perish right here on Earth.
Well, it's like in punctuated equilibrium in evolution. You have steady state, and you're in a system, and then there's birth. It's like being in a birth canal. And then you have a movement, and then the new appears. We need a new vision, and we don't have one. We're reifying outdated institutions out of history because it's comfortable. Everybody's comfortable in saying and it's the United States, without vision, from the intellectual leadership, they divided it all up, got them all co-opted, and so forth, and the peer review and everything. They haven't been able to come up with a vision of how are we going to form capital, and do it in a way that's going to involve demand into the hands of the masses of the people so they won't have to be subject to what the people who own all the capital now tell them they have to do in order to have bread to eat. That's the problem that's confronting us, and we're doing it now, and there's no mention of that ever in the news or anywhere.
You know, what you just said reminds me of the title of a work by the great Colombian writer, Gabriel García Márquez.
Yeah.
In Spanish is called Crónica de una muerte anunciada.
Elucidada?
Anunciada.
Meaning
what you just, Crónica de una muerte anunciada.
A death of something.
Well, what you are describing is basically you're chronicling, you're giving the narrative for a death of our species if we don't wake up.
Yeah, but realize we were protected in our impotence. Second World War, we could go and bomb Dresden with our hatred and our ginned up this, and they'd manipulate us and everything. But it's different. The world has changed since about 1970. And there's no mention of it. There's no mention of the qualitative, because you have to be up
But we have to change our consciousness to catch up with that change.
Well, if it's true, those two things should be 45 feet high.
But you said the modeling has been done,
Modeling
and it shows that it is correct. So therefore, we have to somehow alter our consciousness in order to deal with that reality.
Yeah, but it's totally inconvenient to all our institutions. How are you going to deal? If you think 1,000 years out, they're going to figure 1,000 years out if we make it, if we navigate this birth. It's like leaving the womb. It's like leaving the birth canal. We're coming into a new relationship, liberated. A liberated order rather than an enslaved one.
So our attitude has to change.
Well, yes, because it's being mandated by the extension of the consciousness. And it would be nice if once in a while this modeling or this thinking would come to be mentioned by somebody in a position of responsibility, rather than all the argumentation that goes on and it's going to come up on this election, and how are we going to, is it Keynes, is it Schumpeter, is it this, is it that, supply side, all the rest of it, and they're not coming up with a question of the...
Do you think that anyone in a position of power would dare to bring something like
they wouldn't.
this
No,
up?
you wouldn't expect somebody in a. The more you're in an institution, it seems to me, the more you're going to be enthralled to the institutional assumptions of that institution. It's harder for the goldfish.
Your survival requires it within the institution.
And also your consciousness. The goldfish can't see the water it swims in. You have to be outside. So it's the intellectuals. It's the intellectuals that. Where are the intellectuals that are calling these kind of issues that the world has at a level of capability?
So it's a failure of imagination.
Imagination, and also a reading of the altered reality that is reality at a level 1/2 meta step up from normally perceived news. It's there, without getting into all the spiritual stuff and everything. But it would be there, and it has to do with economic theory, basically, and it has to do with the fact that we are bringing... Aristotle said that Greece was organized, it was based on slavery. And he said there would always need be slavery until and unless the loom learned to weave. The loom is learning to weave. We have an incredible nanotechnology is just over the just over the horizon. It's coming. We have a capability, but you have to have a system. But also what is coming is massive unemployment. You're not going to be able to justify...
And the problems that come with that.
You have to have an alternative way of getting money. Let's just say money or demand capability to clear the market. And you're going to have the people talking about a jobless recovery. They're going to be joblessness because you're not going to be able to... if you got an algorithm that can take 20,000 people off the line and get the production done, you're not going to be able to create jobs for those people like you used to be able to do in the assembly line. So you're going to have an alternative way of distributing money. So you're going to have an ownership of the technology producing the wealth, and then there's going to have to be a way for the people of the world to have the ability to clear the market on market terms, and we don't have it in our economic theory. All they say is we got to create jobs. Everything comes back to jobs. And that's the biggest danger, and that's what makes the United States of America, with its sense of historical legitimacy, not legitimate yet until they come up with something to what the future requires rather than reify the outdated institutions. They'll have to be subsumed, but they have to have the vision, and it's the work of the intellectuals that are falling down on the job.
Well, I was going to link what you just said, that conclusion, with our original thought, that it really makes me pessimistic when I consider that you are postulating that unless our intellectuals become capable, at least, of apprehending that which you describe, then we are doomed. That's my conclusion. But my point about linking this to the original point of intelligence, if our current and immediate generations in the upcoming future are not using intelligence, and they're being they're growing into zombie-like creatures, how are we possibly going to get to the point where these generations, the current one and subsequent ones, will be capable intellectually of apprehending what you're saying. I see that it's not happening currently, and unless some very drastic changes happen in the way we use our brains, our intelligence, it is not likely to happen. You will have all these great institutions, Harvard's, the Yale, MIT's.
They haven't come up with anything
exactly.
yet.
So if they haven't come up with anything, and we have this generation of, dummies, how likely is it that we're going to get to that point where the intellectuals are going to apprehend and act on the that which needs to be done in order to save us?
The central question confronting humanity. And I don't think it's going to come out of your established institutions, and I don't know. And Norbert Wiener...
We don't have the Buckminster Fullers anymore.
Well, that's a shame. They're still there. We can repair to them. They're there. We can go to them. And Norbert Wiener said, information overload permits pattern recognition. What you have to do is get out of thinking parochially about this issue, that issue, and get, if there's static or information overload in this, you get upset. You don't know what. But get out of the specialization, get into a comprehensive overview. And when you get to a comprehensive overview, you can see a lot of different patterns. And I think the people are confused by the overload. Because is it Sarah Palin? Is it this? Is it that? And all the different kind of tunnel vision things. CIA doesn't talk to FBI. All the national difference, all the differences of that, of information. But what you need is
so we're not seeing the forest for the trees.
Exactly. We're not comprehensive. Academia has galloped to specialization. It goes to specialization. If you specialize, you get more money. And it's an intellectual divide and conquer. And what you need are comprehensive overview, comprehensive thinking. I think it's going to come out of things like public access cable television, or places where multimedia is able to be brought in, and people will be able to put these things within they have to put a larger pattern available to people. And I think it'll emerge out of the multimedia, and probably largely institutionally important is public access where we work.
It's interesting you mentioned public access.
We only got a couple minutes.
I was just thinking of the fact that one can say that at least 2/3 of our so-called producers in public access probably should be in insane asylums.
Well,
because what we have in public access in general are people who are fanatical, who are exhibitionists, and who are, instead of using their intellect to somehow methodically consider the issues and to also engage in dialogue and in a conversation that will bring people together. Instead, what we have is people screaming out all their fanatical views, and they have these crazy notions and theories
like
about
this thing I just put forth.
No,
what I just put forth is called crazy.
It's
crazy
something that's beyond
it doesn't bring money.
Well,
if it doesn't bring money, it has no value.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that your view is one of these insane theories that are thrown out in public access.
A lot of people would.
Well,
because it doesn't fit into one of the others. Yeah.
If you say these things which are very abstract and are general and that require a new outlook, your views might be dumped together with all these crazy, insane theories that go out there.
I'm with the people.
I'm with the people, but I want the people to think.
Yeah, but the ones who are supposed to be the leaders of intellectual thinking are all bought off by peer-reviewed things that won't allow them to think comprehensively. There's no comprehensive going on. The youth are ready for that.